Been a lot of posts going around about why everybody's getting sober, and I'm going to explain to you why this is happening. It's because we're getting smarter as people.
So look at this study. The date is 1999, 25 years ago. Moderate drinking and reduced risk of heart disease. And there were a whole ton of studies that I've seen beginning all the way back in the 60s, going through the 90s, that showed that people who drank a small amount daily, 1 or 2 drinks a day, seemed to have better health than people who didn't drink at all or people who drank more than that. But let's look a little bit more at his study. So he looked at studies that went back all the way to the 70s, and he found that all alcoholic beverages seemed to protect against coronary artery disease, although some additional protection may be attributable to personal traits or drinking patterns among people who share some preferences, or it might be non-alcohol ingredients in specific beverages. Alcohol's protective effect may result from favorable alterations in blood chemistry and the prevention of clot formation in arteries that deliver blood to the heart. And all those conjectures were out there for many, many years, but none of them were proven. And in fact, there were many studies that tried to find the reasons, that tried to prove things, but they couldn't. Here's where he points out some problems with the studies that he looked at. They include individual susceptibility, how people describe their drinking levels, how people may not be accurate in what they describe, and how there are other problems that they might be engaging in. Finally, he says that everything is based on self-reported estimates. So are people in better health? Are people actually drinking what they say they are? It wasn't verifiable. And one more gem from the study: alcohol was widely presumed to alleviate chest pain by dilating the coronary blood vessels. However, there was no study that could prove that that was happening or could show better oxygenation after people drank. Thus, the perceived beneficial effects of alcohol consumption may be subjective, resulting from alcohol's sedating and anesthetic effects. Remember that line for me. Here's one, 20 years later after his study. February 2019, drinkers in Australia. And what they did was they looked at people who just drank, moderate and heavy drinkers in Australia, and they just followed up with them over the years. The average period of follow-up was 5.5 years, and they found almost 10% had ceased drinking. Drinking cessation was associated with 24 of 32 health conditions that they examined. Let's see: diabetes, Parkinson's, poor memory, hip fractures, strokes, breast cancer, heart disease, and osteoarthritis. Strong associations with quitting were observed in those with a decline in self-rated overall health and quality of life. Now, when they talked about light and moderate drinkers being healthier than non-drinkers, they were saying there was a J curve. Basically, you had people who didn't drink at all right here, and by drinking a little more, they were less likely to have health problems, but then heavier drinking led to a lot of health problems. Well, it turned out that J curve was because non-drinkers were including both people who had never drank and people who had quit drinking. So those studies were lumping in people who had either never drank or had only been very occasional drinkers with people who had quit because they were getting sick. And that's where we get the sick quitter theory. And here we have some evidence. Former drinkers have been found to exhibit poorer self-reported health, higher levels of depression, and increased risk of mortality than people who never drank. So here's a question then: what's a safe level of alcohol consumption? Well, this study looked at MRIs of people's brains both before and after they drank. And here's the different areas of the brain that they looked at. You can see it kind of over here marked in purple. And you can see in each of these little charts, there's before, 30 minutes after, and an hour after, and they basically were looking at inflammation. And wouldn't you know, every single case there was more inflammation, and it was worse in men than it was in women. In fact, much, much worse in men. It's Mental Health Month, fellas, and alcohol will destroy your brain. But you don't have to believe me. You can look at this study from 2020. Moderate alcohol use is associated with decreased brain volume in early middle age in both sexes. And what they did was they looked at men and women between the ages of 39 and 45. And they said, okay, how much do you drink? How often? How much at a time? How often do you binge drink? And then they MRI'd their brains to look at their brain volume. And here's what they found. A 1 is just somebody who has 1 or 2 drinks a week. And a 12 is somebody who drinks every day and gets drunk on the weekends. And there was no level of alcohol consumption that didn't lead to smaller brain volume. Alcohol kills neurons. And you can't afford to lose those. You need them. And specifically, the places that experience the most damage, at least right away, the frontal lobes and the temporal lobes. Here's a more recent study that looked at associations between empathy and alcohol use. And these were their findings. Individuals with alcohol use disorder reported significantly lower empathy than healthy controls. Study quality and gender were not moderators. Increases in age corresponded to an increase in effect. Individuals with alcohol use disorder had significantly lower cognitive but not effective empathy. And the difference between these was significant. In non-clinical samples, individuals with lower empathy reported heavier alcohol consumption and more alcohol problems. Now, effective empathy is basically your ability to look at people and see what they're feeling. So it appears that people with alcohol use disorder, which is an illness, by the way, don't seem to lose their ability to see what other people are feeling at the moment. And we all know this. We know that folks with addictions don't have a problem with seeing the emotions of people right in front of them. It's what kind of helps people be manipulated by addicts. However, cognitive empathy is your ability to plan for the future. I don't drink because I can't afford to lose my ability to plan for the future. Now, this study looked at blood alcohol levels of homicide victims in the United States. And just to be clear, I'm not blaming the victim in any of these circumstances. However, they have found that among all homicide victims, almost 40% had positive blood alcohol levels. And in fact, men who were victims of homicide were twice as likely to be drunk. Now, bad things like that don't necessarily happen to people because they're bad, but they happen to people who are in harm's way. So why would I consume a substance that could put me in harm's way? And if the victimization argument wasn't bad enough, here's another: mental disorders and intimate partner violence perpetrated by men toward women. And they looked at all these different mental health disorders, which, by the way, it's Men's Mental Health Month, so if you're having a problem, now would be a good time to reach out for help. But they looked at all these different mental health disorders: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, ADHD, personality disorders, so BPD, NPD, APD, antisocial personality disorder was less associated with violence than drinking and drug use. There you go, alcohol use disorder, drug use disorder. And even that stat is a little bit deceptive, because when they looked at all these other disorders by themselves, in the majority of cases of intimate partner violence, drug and alcohol use disorders were a cofactor. So I agree, we're getting smarter. I'm fortunate alcohol never had a hold on me. I took my last drink a little over 2 years ago, and I'm never having another. And if you're experiencing a problem with alcohol or drug addiction, today is a good day to ask for help.